Over the past 3 years, around the world, I've asked several hundred executives to assess the amount of change they're experiencing in their companies and in their industry. We give them a 100-point scale. We keep track of the responses. 1's virtually no change. 100 is just unbelievable amounts of change. And the average score at the end of 2 years is 72. This is why we're starting to hear the clarion call for leadership, because change and leadership are inextricably linked together.
Welcome to FCCI's Pathway to Purpose podcast, where we explore what it means to lead with authenticity, navigate change, and pursue a calling that leaves a lasting impact. I'm your host, Ken Powell, and today we're diving into leadership, what it is, why it matters, and how it's more than just a title or position. Our guest is Pat MacMillan, a respected consultant, author, and executive advisor with decades of experience guiding organizations and leaders through times of transformation. Pat's wisdom is grounded not just in theory, but in real-world experience. He's worked alongside founders, he's shaped leadership teams, and he's helped organizations from small businesses to Fortune 500 giants adapt to the relentless pace of change. As Pat shares, leadership isn't just about managing processes or holding authority. It's about influence, about inspiring people to move beyond their comfort zones and achieve a noble purpose together. In a world where change is constant, where the old rules no longer apply and new ones haven't been written, leadership is the difference between thriving and becoming obsolete. Pat will take us back to the basics, drawing on timeless lessons from history, business, and faith. He'll challenge us to consider the foundation of our own leadership, what drives our decisions, how we build trust, and why personal authenticity is at the core of lasting change. So whether you're leading a team of 10 or 10,000 or simply seeking to lead yourself more purposefully, this episode will equip you with insights and practical wisdom for today's turbulent world. Here's Pat MacMillan as he spoke to an audience at an FCCI International Conference.
The theme of this conference is back to the basics, and I couldn't think of anything more basic to talk about than leadership. It's truly a topic of the ages. It's talked about a lot and has always been talked about. From Homer to Confucius, Plato and his 3 types of leaders. In the book of Judges, it says that in those days there was no king in Israel, and therefore everyone did what was right in his own sight. That's the last verse of Judges, but it's also the 4th time this particular verse is used in Judges. Judges went through a very tumultuous time of change. 15 judges were brought forth over a good number of years to kind of lead Israel through some tumultuous times. But what a classic plea for leadership, this verse. So it's not a new topic. It's an old topic. It is a basic topic. Now, before I jump into leadership, I want to spend a few minutes to talk about change, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. But the bottom line is, it is change that calls leadership into place. It's change that calls for the need of leadership. You can go back periods in our country where hardly, just within the last 20 years, where very few books on leadership were written. There have been a few times in the last 10 years where as many as 1,500 to 2,000 titles were published in 1 year. So leadership has again become a very hot topic, and the reason is for change. Now, things are changing out there, and they're changing a lot, and they're changing pretty fast. And I believe that every generation believes that it lives in an unprecedented time of change. But this one may be right. You've read the books, you've read the headlines, you've felt the effects both on a personal and professional level. But let me just make a few comments just so we're all on the same page, and I'll go very quickly. Thomas Friedman, who wrote the book on globalization, was right. The world is flat, and it's getting flatter. We become a globally interlinked economy that could not be imagined 20 years ago. We live in a world of giant markets and big, tough competitors and new rules of commerce that not everybody is following. Everything is connected to everything else. And we're experiencing new geopolitical realities. They're changing the way we live and the way we think. We live in a world of one superpower, a superpower that's not feeling very powerful anymore. Terrorism has become a constant presence. It must be taken into account in almost every facet of our lives. At least 3 or 4 times a year when I'm traveling overseas, I've got to take into consideration the security situation because of terrorists. I have an office in Bogota, and I don't go running in downtown Bogota anymore, or Medellin. And we've got bad state players. They're not playing by the rules and are taking a disproportionate amount of time of our international institutions. We're experiencing a technological tsunami spurred by giant leaps of advances in the speed and the size of chips, high velocity growth in wireless, the convergence of data, of voice, and of video. Things aren't going back to normal. This is the new normal. Now, the reason I'm starting my comments on leadership about change is this is why we're starting to hear the clarion call for leadership. Because change and leadership are inextricably linked together. Over the past 3 years, around the world, I've asked several hundred executives to assess the amount of change they're experiencing in their companies and in their industry. We give them a 100-point scale. We keep track of the responses. 1's virtually no change. 100 is just unbelievable amounts of change. And the average score at the end of 2 years is 72. The old ways of working no longer work. The new rules, or the old rules don't work, and the new rules haven't been written. Doing business in today's world for small, little 10-person firms and for big 2.1 million person firms, that's Walmart. It's like doing business in a whitewater world. Turbulent, rocky, dangerous, unpredictable. You know, whitewater enthusiasts have this rating system that kind of tell everybody what they think of a particular body of water. It goes from 1 to 7. 4 is very difficult. 5 is extremely difficult. 6, there's the potential loss of life. And I believe that we're living in a level 5 or 6 part of the river. And the one thing I know about business is that if things change faster out there than they do in here, we're in trouble. That's when businesses go out of business. The landscape is littered with organizational carcasses like dinosaurs who got caught by surprise in the vice of change. And being big is no guarantee of survival. Just on the Fortune 500 alone, 33% of the Fortune 500 companies fall off the list after 7 years. 2,000 companies have been on the list since 1955. Only 71 still exist of the original group. Just as recently as 2007, just talking about size, it took $4.5 billion to get on the list. Those are the types of companies that are disappearing from the list. Size won't cover it. We all want to be featured on the front cover of Fortune magazine, but not this one. The individuals on this list failed, and many of their companies failed. And here's why, said the author of this article. They failed to see, to understand, and to respond effectively to change. This is one of my favorite cartoons about change and leadership. The dinosaurs are meeting. The fellow at the podium is saying, "The picture's pretty bleak, gentlemen." I'm reading this for the people in the back. "The world's climates are changing, the mammals are taking over, and here we sit with brains the size of a walnut." Now, disruptive change is unsettling. Old rules don't work. Things are confusing, uncertain, scary. And in such situations, the sheep begin to alertly lift their heads and look around for the shepherd. Now let me be very clear. These sheep are looking for leadership and not management. Because change happens. And when it does, you can't manage your way through change in crisis. Don't miss that. Because tonight we're going to be talking about management and leadership and the difference as we build a platform for tomorrow's comments. And the problem is that companies generally have too much management and not enough leadership for times of change. But when I have a situation or a context that's stable and predictable and quiet, I can get along with management pretty well and a little bit of leadership. But when I have a situation that's changing and volatile and turbulent, unpredictable, I need leadership. Here's the dilemma. We have a lot of companies with this model, A, in this world, B. And when that happens, they sound amazingly similar to the dinosaurs. Warren Bennis observed that the American companies may be some of the best managed companies in the world, but quite likely the poorest led. Another fellow named John Kotler, a professor at Harvard, said somewhat the same thing a little bit more eloquently. He said, during times of peace, an army can do pretty well with a good leader at the top and good management through the ranks. But in times of war, no one has ever learned how to manage an army. So I'm talking about management and leadership. And as we look across the world, we see a lot of companies that are confused, and a lot of individuals confused about the difference between management and leadership. They turn around and say, we need more leadership, and they build managers. So I want to leave you tonight with a very clear definition of the distinctives of the two. Let's see if we can do that. Well, first of all, a major difference is the processes. Managers have different processes than leaders. Managers plan, budget, organize and staff. They monitor results. They solve problems and make decisions. They coordinate. They make sure that we got the systems and the processes, all of which are critically important for a well-run business. Leaders, on the other hand, build strong personal foundations for a reason I'm going to share with you in a second. They define the vision. They map out a strategy. They inspire commitment. They lead the way. They leave a legacy. In fact, that was one of the primary distinctives that Jim Collins put in his book, On Good to Great, on the level 5 leader. They leave a legacy. Now, if I do all those things under the management column, I'm going to deliver consistent results. How important is that? I've seen those little holes that Bobby puts in his ceramics, at Applied Ceramics. They're really small. I can't get a pen through one. He tells me it's very important they're all the same size, consistent results. If I do what's on the leadership column, I'm going to end up with constructive change. How important is that? You can see where I'm going. They're different, radically different, but both very important. Again, Cotter speaks out and says managers keep things operating to produce the agreed upon, consistent and current results, whereas leaders bring about significant change to bring about different results. Now, the processes are not only different, but the very nature of their influence is different. I'm going to build two lists. Let's look at the management column, the focus. First of all, management is a positional idea. It's a positional concept. Leadership, on the other hand, is a personal concept. The power source of a manager is their positional authority. If I were assigned a manager in FCCI, And if I had a chair up here, that would be the manager's chair, and I sit in it, and in that chair comes a certain amount of prerogatives and authority and power to be able to tell certain people what to do and how to do it and when to do it and to hold them accountable to do it. When I get up and leave FCCI, the power stays behind in the chair. Leaders, on the other hand, their power comes from personal authenticity. It's woven into the fabric of who they are. Them as a person, their moral authority, their authenticity. We're going to see that again tomorrow as we take a look at some biblical metaphors for leadership. If I'm in this chair as a leader and I leave, the power I have as a leader leaves with me. The mandate for a manager comes from the organization. The mandate for a leader comes from the followers. It drives me up a tree when someone calls me in and says, "Hey, MacMillan, I want to show you my leaders." Well, he can't show me his leaders. I got to talk to the followers to see if they're leaders. He can show me his managers. The objective of the manager is consistency. The objective of the leader is constructive change. Both are needed. The strategy to achieve consistency is compliance. Management is a transactional job. You do this, and I'll do this for you, like pay you a salary. Whereas leadership the strategy is commitment. I can't command you to change. It's a commitment that I must call out of you. The limits a follower response for a manager are generally a contract or a job description. This is what I'm paid to do. These are the standards of performance. There are no limits of response for a leader. So the very nature of their influence is different. Now, here's an important point. When you read a lot of books on the difference between a manager and a leader, you get the impression that leadership is good and management is something you do if you can't lead. That debate was started in 1962 by a guy named Zalesnik in a Harvard Business Review article and a later book called The Managerial Mystique. And he's a Harvard professor. I'm sure he's very smart, but I'm pretty sure he's also been educated beyond his intelligence, because nothing could be further from the truth. We've all known people that were exceptional managers. Notice my scale over here: management, low, high; leadership, low, high. So this person is high manager, low leadership. They were just good managers. They weren't real good leaders. They weren't visionaries. I was with the head of a unit, a firm that I do strategic planning with. It's an industrial firm, and they make things for the U.S. military. They're the largest in their sector, and we're getting ready to do the strategic plan. And he's walking down the hall. He says, "Pat, I'm going to need a lot of help on this. I am not a strategic thinker." And I thought he was kidding, but I discovered that the reality was that was an overstatement. He's not, but he's one of the best operators I've ever seen in my life. But he's a manager. And then we also know people that are really good leaders. They're just phenomenal. They've got vision and a direction and clarity, but they're not quite sure where staples come from. And so, they need to have somebody work with them, maybe somebody from the other quadrant. We know some people that are neither. They're not interested in it. But to run successfully a small or large business in today's world, you need to be able to do both. And by the way, people say, well, it's much more difficult to run large companies. Men and women, that's not right. Small companies are actually a little bit more of a challenge. It would take me about a year to run Procter & Gamble out of business. I'm that good. But I could run Applied Ceramics out of business in about 15 days. Small businesses turn faster. I remember one of my chief operating officer came out of Procter & Gamble, and Bobby knows him, and I came walking in one day. He'd been there about a week, and he's kind of white in the face. And I said, "How you doing, Jim?" He says, "Well, I'm doing okay." He says, but boy, you can feel the tide going in and out around here because it's a small business. And complexity is really more embedded in small businesses than big businesses. General Electric is a relatively simple business. You get big and complex, you got problems. So to run a business successfully in a world of change, you've got to be able to manage, and you've got to be able to lead, and you've got to know when to do which one of those two. Does that make sense? Last week's Fortune magazine had an interesting article on this very topic. It said, meet the CEO of the biggest company in the world. And they're introducing a fellow named Mike Duke, who's a committed believer, as was his predecessor. And to give you an idea how big Walmart is, in 2009 they reported $408 billion in revenue. That's more money than I made last year, and I'm talking a whole 12 months. $408 billion. They have 8,500 stores. They have 2.1 million employees. And this year, to increase sales 3% means they've got to find $12 billion worth of new revenue. And by the way, $12 billion would make just that one incremental increase the 194th company on the Fortune 500. That's what he's running. So here's the quote, and I put it up on your screen. This was just literally in last week's Fortune, might still be the current week. The fellow speaking is Lee Scott, Mike's predecessor, and he says, both I and the board thought the company could be better managed. And Mike is not only a good leader, but a really good manager. There is so much said today about leadership, but I don't think you can forget that in business today, you've got to lead and you've got to manage. And that was my point. So get this one point. Both disciplines are very important. However, the key is, for any business, is to have an appropriate amount of both management and leaders. And generally, when the ratio's not right, you've got too many managers. Harvard Business School put out a survey a number of years ago, not that long ago, but it's not like within the last 2 years. And they asked a group of executives about their leadership bench strength in their companies in light of the change they were experiencing. 50% felt that their company had too few leaders for today's environment. 66% felt they had too many managers. And 100% felt they had too few people who could do both. Now back to the leader. The power of a leader flows from their ability to find followers, to get elected by followers by being worthy of their trust and followership. Followership is a volunteer activity. I can't command compliance, or I can't command commitment. I can command compliance, but not commitment. That's volunteered. The seeds of this power flow out of the fundamental mindset and philosophy of the leader. Now don't miss this. Leadership is first and foremost a mindset. We're going to talk a lot about that tomorrow. This is the idea that comes to me graphically. Even if I'm assigned this management role and I get this chair in the company and I sit in it, I have a key decision to make. What's the mindset in which I will occupy this chair? Will it be that of a ruler, interested in my self-interest? By the way, Walt, can you get me some iced tea with mint? Because I need to be served in this position. Will it be a bureaucrat interested in the rules, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, or will it be a leader interested in service? That mindset is determinative. And we're going to talk again about that tomorrow. That's why tonight we're just kind of laying some groundwork for that conversation. Now, if leadership is so important, we've got to have a working definition Otherwise, we'll not be able to recognize or develop them. And there are no end of definitions. Here's 3 of them. There's a book called Stodghill's Handbook of Leadership that's got over 350 of them. Someone once said we have as many definitions of leadership as we have individuals trying to define them. But here's a couple I pulled out. I like these. I particularly like Dr. John Mott's, a missionary from early in the previous century. But I'd like to suggest a very straightforward, easy to remember, but comprehensive definition. It's built around the idea that leadership is at its core influence. And any time you try to influence someone's behavior and attitude, you are exercising leadership. This is a definition of leadership we developed at Leadership Dynamics nearly 35 years ago. We have a number of the people in the room that were at that very first meeting when we rolled it out at Point Clear. And in fact, there's a little bit of genesis of FCCI there, if I remember right, Bobby, isn't it? I think that's where we told you it would never work. Is that right? Boy, were we bright. That's why we never did get regular jobs. We're all still consultants. And Bruce Cook, another alumni, is going to be sharing with you tomorrow, I believe, and the next day. But we came up with this definition. We said a leader is a person who influences people to accomplish a noble purpose. Person, people, purpose. In that one phrase, it captures every possible dimension of leadership. I love that approach because it allows us to take each one and hold them up. Let's just talk about the person of the leader. Who is she? What are her attributes? What are her strengths, her weaknesses, her potential? And these people, who are they? What are their fears? What are their needs? What are their aspirations? How can I serve them? And this purpose, what makes it noble? You see all 3 of these dimensions. Whoops, wrong slide, but we can also draw it out graphically like this way. This would be the graphic representation of what I just said. Person influencing people to achieve a purpose. And we can take Mark 3:14 and you can see all of its elements. The person, he, appointed the 12 so that they could be with him and that he could send them out to preach, the he being Christ, appointed the 12 for the purpose of going out and preaching. So what have I said to this point? Things are changing. They're changing with such force that if organizations don't see it coming, don't understand its implications, and don't respond accordingly, there's possible loss of organizational life. Number 2, dealing with change is the primary role of leadership. Remember, what leadership produces is constructive change. Number 3, management and leadership are different, and both are important. Management is an organizational idea. Leadership is a personal one. Number 4, the dilemma is that organizations, for the most part, have too many managers and not enough leaders, and for one reason, they don't understand the difference between the two. And finally, we've just defined a leader as a person who influences people to accomplish a noble purpose. Influence is the key idea. And whether this leader is taking these people to a new place, a new way of doing things, a new way of thinking, everything is about change. We're asking them to change in some way, to some degree. So why would these people allow this leader to influence their attitude or their actions voluntarily? Think about a time in your life in which a leader successfully influenced you to leave your comfort zone and to go into the white area of the map. The white area of the map is scary. Remember the old days when they used to draw these maps and you saw the outline of the coast, but nothing behind it? Or the water, but you didn't know what was out there? And the cartographers would often run out of knowledge before they ran out of parchment. And so they just kind of left it white, and they drew a little dragon out there in the white part, and then wrote, "There be dragons." There be dragons in the white area of the map. So leaders are men and women that can get us out of that comfort zone into the white area of the map and perform our very best. Hopefully, they've got the competence to get us back to home territory. This person could have been a teacher, a coach, a parent, a pastor, a manager, anyone. What were the actions this person took that you found so compelling? What were the attributes that they possessed that made them such an effective leader in your life? That's an interesting exercise to write down. You will learn an awful lot about leadership that you admire and would like to imitate by going through that exercise. It's the qualities or attributes embedded in the individual, in them as a person, that makes us willing to follow them. And these qualities are what we find attractive. In some respects, they represent leadership muscle. And the stronger these attributes are in a person, and the more they're reflected in our lives, the more impactful we are as leaders in the lives of others. Personal authenticity. Highly effective leaders pay attention to these list of attributes. In fact, most of them develop their own list. If you ask Steve Reineman, who's now the dean of the business schools at Wake Forest, but was chairman and CEO of PepsiCo, neat Christian brother, you asked him, what are you looking for in a leader? He says, I'm glad you've asked that. I've got 6 qualities I look for. I try to build them into my own life, and I try to look for them in the lives of the men and women that we're developing as leaders here at PepsiCo. The list of personal attributes they think make them much more impactful as a person and as a leader. There's lots of people that have these lists. Here's Howie Hendricks. And I was just with Howie talking about leadership to a group of his executives about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And he's still building his list. He's still taking notes. One of my staff guys came up at break and said, Pat, he's taking notes. Same green pen he used 40 years ago. Henry Cloud, that's his list. Andy Stanley, many of you know Andy, he's got a list. We've got a list, Triaxia. Paul had a list. He wrote the list to Timothy and to Titus. Here's a list from 1993 that generated 4 best-selling books on leadership. Leadership is basically a personal concept. The source of its power resides in the person of the leader. Then if that's the case, then it's up to the leader to develop and sharpen and hone and steward those leadership attributes. Remember, when going back to the processes of the manager and back to the processes of the leader, the first process of the leader was building a strong personal foundation. Many take this task seriously. They read books, and they go to workshops and conferences. They hire coaches. They all do these things to some effect, but they're very secondary. The key is, can they build a strong foundation? And I'm watching my time. I'm very clear that some of us are on East Coast time, as we've already talked, so we're going to do a little editing. Is that all right? So we're going to try a great technological thing here. And I'm going to ask them to turn to, the men in the back, slide 50. Let's see if this technological marvel works. Slide 50. Let me see what that says. That's good. Hold on that moment. Now let me give you an idea of what I mean. We've got all those lists of attributes. Some of them are decisiveness, others are vision, others are competency. Let's just grab one. Let's grab one that seems to be very important and close to the top of everybody's list. And let's see if we can see the difference between the attribute and the foundation on which it rests. Let's look at the idea of character. Every major study on leadership, every survey that I've ever read on leadership says the number one attribute that people look for in followers is character. Character. So how do I develop character? Well, I know what to do. I'm going to read a book on character. That'll do it, will it not? Or I'm going to go to a workshop on character. Now, how do people know if I have character? My conduct. What determines my conduct? My choices. Making tough choices. Making tough choices. What determines my choices? Courage. Do I have the courage to make the tough calls in the face of temptation? What determines my courage? Conviction. Not my beliefs, conviction. Much stronger idea. What determines my convictions? My calling. Character is based on my choices, which is based on my courage, based on my conduct, evidenced by my conduct, based on my choices, based on my courage, based on my convictions, which is based on my calling. Now, I could do that for vision. I can do that for decision, decisiveness. I could take all of those and build down to this idea that's central, foundational calling. And this is what Paul said to Timothy about calling. God, who has saved us and called us with a holy calling. It's our Christian identity. Peter said the same thing, basically reminded them of the same thing in 1 Peter 2:9, calling. So men and women, where I come down to this is we have a leadership practice literally all over the world. The woman that heads it was head of leadership development of one of the world's largest corporations, neat Christian woman. And we go to all these corporations to help them set up the systems and the processes and the training and the selection processes to help build their leaders. And I've got no end of books and workshops and strategies and conferences and methodologies for building leaders. But I watch it all come to nothing when they don't have a strong foundation on which to hold it. Because if I'm not on that foundation of calling that can give me the level of conviction that I need to have for the amount of courage that I need to have to make the right choice in temptation, it all crashes down. And again, for any of the leadership attributes, I just drill down until I get to calling. That's the number one leadership development strategy that I know of. If I could only do one thing, I would say to God, Lord, would you show me your ways? Because that's the foundation on which I'm going to build my personal authenticity as a leader. And all the rest of it is helpful, but it's got to be founded on that. Now, we've taken a shortcut to the end, but it's that calling that gives me the answers to life's big questions. Who am I? How did I get here? Why am I here? How then shall I live? How then shall I lead? By the way, I get asked all the time, is religious faith, is what you're saying, is religious faith required to build great character? I say, absolutely not. I didn't mean to imply that. However, you need something that will play the same role. You need something that is a conviction about some truth that you hold so dearly that you're willing to pay the ultimate sacrifice to hold it. I know nothing other than my calling in Christ that could hold that level or weight of conviction. And godly leaders have a high view of their calling. They cultivate it, they protect it, they nurture it, they defend it. It's central to who they are as leaders and as people. It's the source of all the right perspective as to what leadership is about. And without a clear sense of calling, leaders become arrogant. They begin to see their leadership as a position to be served instead of a role from which to serve. They begin to see it as a position of privilege. They begin to see the resources under their stewardship to be used for their pleasure rather than the needs of their people. They soon see themselves above it all.
Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of FCCI's Pathway to Purpose podcast. As Pat MacMillan reminded us, true leadership is about influence, not just authority. It's about building a strong personal foundation, inspiring commitment, and guiding others through change with authenticity and conviction. We've learned that management and leadership are distinct, but both are essential. In times of uncertainty, it's leaders, those who serve, who act from a deep sense of calling, and who are willing to step into the unknown. It is those who make the difference. If today's conversation resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on your own leadership journey. What's your foundation? What qualities do you want to cultivate? And how can you influence those around you toward a noble purpose? If you found value in this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share the Pathway to Purpose podcast with others seeking to lead with meaning and purpose. Until next time, keep pursuing your purpose and leading with authenticity.